you you I actually never noticed this spot before, but going up those stairs to hunt blue dragons, this is like, I don't know, you can see this, but the safe spot here upstairs is great. Absolutely great, especially with long range mode. Oh yeah, I can hit all of these dragons with my dragon crossbow when it's put into long range mode. I believe that the dragon crossbow also has a little bit more range than a standard rune crossbow. Just wanted to say that. Great spot for training. Hello everyone, this is Jewiz Master Adamant's account, playing Mr. Adamant. So, for this demonstration, I just want to show the difference between the Dragon Spear and the Dragon Sword. But for this video, I'm just going to stick with the Dragon Sword. So, the reason why I think that this weapon is kind of viable compared to other weapons is quite simple. So I'm testing out 3 different types of weapons over here. I have, obviously, a Dragon Spear. Right? What I'm impressed with the Dragon Spear about is that base speed is the same as other fast weapons like a dagger, but it's a spear, so it's two-handed. It has balanced stats of crush, slash, and stab. Personally, I think that what makes this weapon the most unique is its special attack, which is here, stunning the opponent for 3 seconds. That's what it does. It just stuns for 3 seconds. I get a hit in, it stuns for 3 seconds. You know, I don't think it actually hits them though, because I go to use a special attack with this thing and I go to hit the combat dummy. It didn't even use the special attack, so that doesn't really work. But if I am going to use a spec, I can use this Dragon Sword over here. Just boost the strength a bit. Just see where we're at. Now I'm out of 26. And the Abyssal Whip is 29. Thing is, the Abyssal Whip has no special and the Dragon Sword does. I hit a 32. And the best part is I can get 2 of those in. So, I hit a 32. And the best part is I can get 2 of those in. So, honestly, it's not wrong to assume that the Dragon Sword doesn't slap. It definitely slaps. I think it's actually decent for PKing. Probably better than any of the other weapons. It's also something to consider when killing dragons, I guess, over the whip. Now, for the stats on the whip, now I'll just pull up. Instead of 32, I want to see how this whip can actually compare. I'm only getting a 26. I go for a prayer spell. I get a 29. And that's pretty much it. Is the Dragon Sword worth it? I guess it's pretty much up to you. The DPS is going to be higher with the whip, but the special attack that's coming from the Dragon Sword is honestly remarkable. I would consider using the Dragon Sword. Well, thanks for watching.
Give me one good reason I shouldn't be. Give me one good.
been ranked as the second best in pretty much any given. The Lone Star State has often been ranked as the second best in pretty much any given category in the U.S., but recent developments and investments across industries and bountiful economic and demographic growth means Texas is poised to become an official superpower in its own right. But what gives a country or a state power? Is it how much land a country owns? What natural riches it has to exploit? The wealth of the people? The size of its military? That last one might seem like a natural response to many, but the current war between Russia and Ukraine might be the exception to the rule. But that's a digression already covered in a different video. Even if power is a combination of all these factors and many more, how do you even measure it? Scholars tend to need tangible, easy to measure, and objective points of reference if they're able to pit countries and territories against each other to come up with a definitive power ranking list. However, the actual result of what's being measured is usually messy, and Texas is the perfect example. Take the country's basic statistics: land area, population, and GDP, gross domestic product, per capita. Ever since Alaska became a member of the Federation, Texas has been sitting idly in second place in terms of total land area. But that's a fact that's relatively unlikely to change in the future unless anyone has a war of reclamation from Mexico on their 2024 bingo card. However, what did change relatively recently is Texas's ability to support population over an area. According to the most recent estimates by the U.S. Census data, Texas has around 30.5 million people. That puts it squarely in second place behind California at 39 million residents. But to get to the true picture of why population matters, we have to go back in time. Fortunately, we don't have to go back that far. The censuses of 2020 and 2010 show us the balance of power has been slowly shifting in Texas's favor. Let's run the numbers. In 2010, California had 37 million residents. Texas had 25 million at the time. It doesn't take advanced math to see that in the past 13 years, California gained only 2 million residents, but Texas managed to grow its population by about 5.5 million. Even more impressive, Texas's population increase over those 13 years amounts to over a 21% increase, which is much more than California's 4.8% or even the country's total 8.4% population increase over the period. So it's quite clear that Texas is gaining on California in terms of population size. But that's not all. Texas has started growing quicker in the past 3 years. By contrast, the population of California was actually higher in 2020 than its current estimates. For the first time since it became a state, California has started to lose more people than it gained each year. And that gives Texas, the next contender, a clear shot at overtaking it. The increase in population directly benefits Texas's heightened political importance in the U.S. In 2021, Texas gained 2 more seats in the House of Representatives. It also gave Texas 2 more electoral votes, from 38 to 40 throughout the 2020s. While California still leads with 54 votes, it squarely puts Texas on the map as a big contender for presidential elections in this decade. The cause for California's demographic downfall and Texas's gain was multifold. By far, the most straightforward reason behind it was the COVID-19 pandemic that hit the U.S. in February 2020. It caused a cascading effect of people leaving the country and an increased death rate. The latter is relatively simple to explain. The former is understandable only if you take a look at the state's relative costs of living. In 2020, the average house in Austin, Texas, by far the priciest part of the state, cost $343,000, and houses in the Dallas-Fort Worth area cost $251,000. By comparison, a house in Los Angeles would set you back $675,000. During the pandemic, workers had more freedom to move across the country as more jobs became remote. The 5 biggest cities in Texas, Houston, San Antonio, Austin, Dallas, and Fort Worth, now house nearly 20 million of the state's 30 million residents. The cities are interconnected by a series of highways and function as a mega region referred to as the Texas Triangle. Apart from housing the majority of the state's population, the Texas Triangle has become a lucrative region for corporations. Due to the lower real estate costs and a booming economy, Fortune 500 companies have been moving their headquarters to Texas or opening large operational and production centers in the state. This resulted in 54 Fortune 500 companies operating out of Texas, a number unmatched by any other state. Even international companies have decided to move in, with a Chinese billionaire buying over 130,000 acres of land to open a wind farm. The South Korean microchip magnate Samsung has allocated $17 billion in investments to open a new production plant inside the state. But what caused such a shift? The answer is rather straightforward: transportation and energy. If you look at the map of the continental U.S., the Texas Triangle sits roughly in the middle section of the country, almost equidistant from the country's east and west coast, while also still being within reach of other international transport centers. The triangle's favorable location resulted in the Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport becoming arguably the second busiest airport in the world, behind Hartsfield-Jackson in Atlanta. The state's access to the Mexican Gulf also provides the Texas Triangle with an easy way to transport goods across the water and minimize transportation costs. The latter boils down to Texas's bounty of natural energy resources, primarily oil and natural gas. The state's rich oil history began in 1901 with the famous Spindletop Gusher near Beaumont, leading to the Texas oil boom. The oil production in Texas waxed and waned between 1901 and 2007. Despite the U.S. becoming a net importer of oil in the 20th century, mainly due to rapid modernization and the extreme reliance on fuel-inefficient methods of transportation to connect the East with the West, the country was still the biggest producer of oil in the world, largely due to the rich oil fields in Texas and the surrounding states. The state's industry primarily revolved and still revolves around oil extraction and refining, even managing to survive past the 1973 oil crisis. In fact, the surging oil prices during the crisis only benefited Texas more, as the state's largest cities grew rapidly due to the state's new wealth. It was effectively the second wave of growth after the initial oil boom, as the state could provide its own oil and would enrich itself by shipping it across the oil-starved country. However, the easy-access oil in Texas would start to run out by the end of the 1900s. The U.S. looked like it was doomed to become eternally dependent on importing oil, and the rich oil fields in Texas, primarily the Permian Basin in the west, halved their overall production from before the crisis. That would change at the turn of the century. By combining the techniques of hydraulic fracking and horizontal digging, the oil industry could achieve something that was previously considered impossible. While traditional methods could easily extract oil directly from underground pools, much of the oil reserves lie in the surrounding porous rocks. Fracking breaks down the rock and allows the oil to flow naturally and be extracted, and horizontal drilling allows a single well to reach a much higher surface area of rock to crush. Suddenly, the oil companies could extract more oil from the shale rock that was plentiful in and around the Texas sedimentary rock. And just like the 1901 Texas boom, it has reinvigorated the state's progress in becoming the most important state of the Federation. With the fracking revolution in full swing, Texas now accounts for 27% and 42% of the country's oil and natural gas production, respectively. It also produces a total of 12% of the country's net electricity. If it were independent, Texas would be the world's fourth largest crude oil producer, behind Saudi Arabia, Russia, and the rest of the U.S. It also produces more natural gas than China and Qatar, which are currently the fourth and fifth global producers. As such, it would also be the fourth largest natural oil producer behind Russia, the rest of the U.S., and Iran. But perhaps even more importantly, Texas has a geographical advantage when it comes to oil and natural gas extraction. The oil-rich land in the Arabian Peninsula, home to the largest shale oil reserve in the world, is surrounded by a barren desert and has a nearly inhospitable climate. The Siberian oil reserves are also sequestered away in Russia's largely inaccessible center region. These oil fields are much more difficult to set up and repair for large-scale oil extraction. Perhaps even more importantly, their remoteness and hostile climate make it difficult to build infrastructure to service the scarcely populated areas. Without an easy way to bring crude or processed oil into the world market, oil transport becomes much more expensive, and these countries have a steeper price to pay if they wish to remain on the top spot for crude oil production. By contrast, the shale rock oil deposits in Texas turned out to be either overlaying the Permian, which already houses a robust oil extraction and transport infrastructure, or surrounding the well-connected Texas Triangle. The relative proximity of oil extraction basins to the residential areas and major transport centers in the Gulf of Mexico artificially drives down transport prices. Furthermore, the Arabian oil needs to be transported through major checkpoints like the Strait of Hormuz, the Suez, and the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. The geopolitical tension that surrounds the peninsula puts even more pressure on Saudi Arabia and Iraq's oil exports. For example, the revolution in Iran in 1979 was a major turning point for the country's political stance and cut off many importers from the Arabian oil reserves. While the situation there remains relatively stable, there's no telling how it'll unravel, especially due to the U.S. heavy interest in the area already, which is covered in our other videos. Conversely, Texan ports have much fewer chances to be closed off to the outside world. The main risk is Cuba being under control of a hostile government. While this is certainly possible and has happened, the current positive relations with Cuba allow oil exports to travel unimpeded from the Gulf of Mexico to the Atlantic and where they need to get. Access to oil and natural gas is also pivotal in the U.S.'s ability to influence the ongoing Russia-Ukraine conflict. The EU has traditionally relied on the oil and gas pipelines coming from Russia and the Middle East, and it was one of the largest net importers of those resources in the world. In the wake of the 2022 conflict, the EU's import of natural gas would directly contribute to funding Russia in the war. The U.S. quickly ramped up natural gas and oil exports to the EU, becoming the largest oil exporter to the EU and shutting off Russia's budget that way. The U.S. also supplies nearly half of the EU's liquefied natural gas needs, up from around 40% before the war. And the EU's reduced dependence on Russia would not be possible without Texas. If the state hadn't bounced back in oil production at the turn of the century, the U.S. would be the largest importer of oil in the world. This would both make it impossible for the country to export oil to the EU and would essentially be competing with the rest of the world for the limited resources found in Russia and Saudi Arabia. It would heavily increase the price Europe would need to pay to cut itself off from Russia's supply. With the abundant oil and natural gas production in Texas, the country can actually export these resources to the EU, allowing it to influence global geopolitics without military intervention. It has directly removed Russia's ability to pressure Europe into funding its war efforts through natural gas and oil access. This makes Texas pivotal in America's ability to influence geopolitics on a global scale. Even if the natural gas reserves were to run dry in Texas and coal got banned, the state still has a few aces up its sleeve. If you were to overlay the map of the highest potential for wind energy production across the U.S., it would run down the Great Plains from North Dakota to the northern part of Texas. With the state's infrastructure already set up to transport oil and natural gas, the wind power section is similarly booming. There are already over 150 wind farms in the state, providing 16% of the state's total energy generation. The total output of Texas wind farms outperforms the rest of the U.S. combined, and the subsequent growth of the industry has led to thousands of new job openings to service it. Additionally, the state also contains some of the best solar potential lands in the country. This solar power generation has rapidly grown, with 10 large solar farms making Texas the runner-up in solar energy production in the country, behind California. This combination of wind and solar power accessibility makes Texas a U.S. pioneer in renewable energy production, which aligns well with the global push toward lowering fossil fuel use. Solar, nuclear, and wind power account for around a third of the state's energy production, and their potential only stands to grow in the coming year as a result. The growing renewable energy production industry provides more investments in the state and creates more job openings, especially for highly lucrative STEM fields with six-figure incomes. With ample energy sources such as oil, natural gas, wind, nuclear, and solar, the state also enjoys a much lower energy price than the national average. This all ties in nicely with why companies are so insistent on moving to Texas. The lower energy price means lower operational costs. The relatively inexpensive housing means more opportunities for workers to move there. And Texas's large land area means real estate is reasonably cheap to obtain and build up. After that, Texas's relative accessibility to the world market through the Gulf of Mexico and busy international airports that serve the Texas Triangle make shipping the finished product more convenient and less expensive. Additionally, an export route from the U.S. is usually more politically stable than if production were to be carried out in China, due to less tension in the country's immediate surroundings. Furthermore, the state's geopolitical stance on corporations is more lenient. The state is one of the few in the U.S. to have zero income taxes. The state does have a slightly steeper sales tax, but the lack of income tax is particularly lucrative to Fortune 500 companies that have set up shop there. In one overview, the tax rate effectively decreases as earnings increase, placing much of the burden on the working class rather than the corporations. While this efficacy of the lopsided tax burden is up for debate, and the few efforts to relieve property tax from the workers are yielding minimal results, the state is poised to remain friendly to big corporations and continue chugging along as an industrial powerhouse. And what is the ultimate effect of corporations moving to Texas at a rapid pace? Texas is steadily rising in both overall GDP and GDP per capita. While California still remains the top dog with a GDP of $4 trillion, Texas is second with $2.5 trillion. Even if the difference might seem insurmountable, you have to remember that growth is also vital. Texas's GDP is growing at a much faster rate than the rest of the country. According to the Bureau of Economic Analytics, or the BEA, the state's real GDP grew by 7.7% in the last year alone, which is miles ahead of the national average of 2.6%. California's GDP grew by only 4.8% in the same period. Texas's growth in the past 3 years is a vastly more substantial